Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, February 28th. Last day of February. That's right. Last day of February, February 28th, 2022. Time for another show. And perhaps you noticed that there was more war over the weekend. It's the same one that we got ready for before the weekend. So they didn't surprise us with any new ones. Although Lauren Boebert apparently trying mightily to do so. In my morning review of what was happening over Twitter, I see that, there was another war going on, I guess. CPAC was in session, and that's always feels like going to war whenever they're around, and they're always calling for a war with somebody. Usually it's on the rest of us. This time, apparently, Lauren Boebert spent her weekend insisting that we needed to be at war with Canada. Sure, why not? They're still angry in CPAC circles about people getting in trouble for having blockaded the streets of Ottawa for 2 or 3 weeks, and insisting that, I guess, in a weird way, that their cherry-picked version of American law, and American constitutional law, that ought to apply up there in Canada. And I'm not really sure why that would be, but I don't know. That's what she did, and I saw Molly Jong Fast today tweeting about that and insisting that Lauren Boebert had spent the weekend insisting that what we really needed to be doing in terms of international intervention was to invade Canada, using, as she says, about going to war with Canada because of their clearing the streets up there. And I don't know what to tell you. The rest of the world was focused on something else. Read the planet, lady. That's all I can tell you. The rest of the world seems to be focused elsewhere. And by the way, I guess they have to do this. This would be the best. I don't know. Maybe they can't come up with anything else in terms of distractions, since they've all been licking Putin's boots for so long and insisting that he was the strong leader that everyone ought to be looking to, despite the fact that he was, something of a weirdo and an imperialist and looking to restore the old Soviet empire, which they keep saying they totally hate because communism, socialism, whatever that is supposed to mean. Anyway, so while the rest of the world was focused on Russia, Ukraine, or perhaps some actual conflicts elsewhere, they were fantasizing about conflicts that aren't happening because they were upset that some truckers got some tickets, I guess, basically is what it comes down to. So, priorities is what it comes down to. So they, I don't know. I guess she didn't get the memo. The rest of them are trying to wiggle out of their previous Putin worship and sign on to the Zelensky agenda, which of course is actually probably possible because for some reason here in the United States, most people probably just don't remember that Donald Trump got impeached the first time trying to extort Zelensky and lay the blame for any conflict with Russia at his feet, and of course withhold any ability that he might have, thanks to Western intervention and Western weaponry as well, to resist should the Russians decide to roll through the rest of his country. That was the pressure point of the extortion. And believe it or not, there are very many people, perhaps the majority of the people in this country, perhaps even a large number of journalists whose job it is ordinarily to tell them to remember things like that, have also forgotten. I've seen a number of examples of that, and I don't know how that could possibly be, but, we worry about this problem all the time. So, okay, lots of other fun things to round up. And by the way, while I have your attention on things other than the roundup of the war, which is certainly coming next, you can tell by the fact that Greg is on his way in the door, I wanted to mention just something that's been sitting on my desktop, and I'm not certain. I'd like to call out the names of the folks who have joined up and either joined us as Patreon supporters or even increased their support via Patreon in the past couple of weeks, and this is a lot of weeks now. I don't know whether I called out Stacy Cox's name for joining as a patron way back at the end of January. And it's been sitting here saying it's time for you to mention it. But, you know, we've had wars and all sorts of crazy things have been happening. And, you know, we got distracted. But also an increase in a pledge from Laura Holmbeck. So I wanted to call everybody out who might not have gotten their mention and try and keep on top of these things better. We always appreciate everyone's support. Please don't invade us. Please don't make us invade you. Please don't let Lauren Boebert want to take over your home. I hope all goes well for you. You deserve peace and tranquility, not invasion, for joining us as patrons. I don't know. It's not really a promise I can make to you in exchange for a couple of bucks, but it feels good. So let's try it. Good morning to Greg Dworkin here, not under any sort of occupation as far as I'm aware in Connecticut. That's good news. Always a good day to start without foreign occupation. I don't think that's a danger, but you never know.
Well, you know, it's always a good day to start in Connecticut, even though it's freezing and icy and, you know, it's still February. But things will get better. It's going to be warm for the rest of the week. Today's pretty miserable, though.
Yes. Well,
but, you know, miserable is a relative thing, you know.
Sure.
Kyiv, that's miserable.
Yeah, that's certainly true. And then, of course, you're going to have a little time left for your shriving in case you haven't shriven for Shrove Tide. And tomorrow would be Shrove Tuesday. I looked it up to find out if there was anything special about Monday. It's just Shrove Monday as well. So a lot of shriving happening today. I could maybe explain that later on in the program.
Yeah, you'll need to me. So, there's a lot going on, but I think that the main thing that people have to understand is that Putin has miscalculated in any one of a number of ways, and I'm going to bring up at least three or four.
Okay.
Okay, because I think it's the only way in my head that I can really organize this. And by the way, before I start, thank you all, listeners, for chiming in and subscribing to David and putting up with me interrupting him. So you pay to hear him talk, and I don't let him. That's the whole deal here.
Well, it's the artificial scarcity you're creating.
Right. It's a supply chain issue as far as I'm concerned. So that's just the way it goes.
Keeps the price up. It's good. Thank you.
So the first thing is that Putin got Ukraine wrong. And there's a fascinating article.
Ukraine. That's how he's supposed to say it.
RUSI. Which is a think tank from England that looks at Russia.
Okay. That's cute.
And has come across, of all things we understand, polling.
Poland?
Yeah, not in Poland, not poll as in Poland, but poll as in Gallup.
Ah. Okay,
right?
hurry
Ukraine
up,
in February 22. According to the polling data, Ukrainians in early February were by and large pessimistic about the future. Sounds a lot like the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
Apathetic about politics and didn't trust politicians, political parties, or the majority of Ukraine's domestic institutions.
It would have been a hard thing to do.
So, like most countries, there's Kyiv, the capital, where people are pretty optimistic about how things work. Washington, D.C., where people sort of have a feel for how things work and are okay with it.
Right.
And the rest of the country,
trucks.
which is pretty pissed off at them. You know, Paris, outside of Paris. A lot of places are like this. And their main concerns in Ukraine were overwhelmingly inflation, cost of living, which was perceived to be rising. So trust in the office sat around 27%, with 67% distrustful of the presidency. Zelensky had poor approval ratings, but a high proportion of Ukrainians polled still professed that they would vote for him over other candidates. So again, approval ratings doesn't always match how you vote. And that's especially true in the U.S. when you look at polling, because Republicans routinely say they hate Democratic presidents and won't vote for them, which is true. And Democrats usually say they hate Democratic presidents, but will still vote for them. So you can get fooled a little bit by low approval ratings. But at the same time, that's the way it was in Ukraine before Putin invaded. The Ukrainian army, both regular and reserve, was highly trusted, with 68% of the population supportive. And the population had a better view of the Ukrainian army than professionals did. Trust in the Ukrainian parliament was abysmal at 11%. And when it came to willingness to serve in the military, 40% of respondents stated they would not defend Ukraine. And then they invaded. So, in other words, this is what Putin was working with.
It looked good on paper.
It looked good on paper.
There you go.
But, you know, the reality is that it may sound like it's a good idea to have truckers converge on Washington, D.C., with the convoy starting from California before this crisis. And by the time they get here, guess what? The world has changed.
Yeah, it took you too long to drive. That's your problem.
Right. So here's one of the things that he miscalculated, of course, was Ukraine. Now, there's a lot going on in Ukraine, but a lot of it has to do with the Russian army and how it's not working the way it was supposed to. Now, they're doing some things, that are working. So I won't say that they're doing anything right, because nothing they're doing is right. But some of the things they're doing are working. They're certainly capable of killing civilians. Right? They circle their planes around Chernobyl, so you can't shoot them down. If you shoot them down, it lands on Chernobyl. That's not good. So they're doing some smart things. But basically, the overrated Russian military has been having some big issues. And remember, the whole thing about what's going on now, this is a two-front war. It's not the Eastern Front and the Western Front. It's on-the-ground military war number one, and the logistical globalist economic system war number two. And as people have put it on Twitter, war number one isn't going the way the Russians wanted, and war number two, they're getting crushed. We'll get to that in a minute. But let's look at the Russian military for a moment. Very, very interesting thread by this Woodrow Wilson scholar, Camille Galiv, about what's happening. Why Russia will lose the war? He says much of the realist discourse is about accepting Putin's victory because it's guaranteed, but how do we know? I'll argue, he says, that analysts overrate the Russian army, underrate Ukrainian army, and misunderstand Russian strategy and political goals.
All right.
Okay.
They might.
So he tells me some things that I didn't know. I always like to find things that I didn't know. From 2007 to 2012, Russia had an extremely competent minister of defense whose name was Serdyukov.
Really? What?
Minister of Defense Serdyukov was terrific at reforming and improving the Russian army. And one of the reasons he is because he challenged the oligarchs, held them to the contracts that they signed. If you say you're delivering 100 missiles, you have to deliver 100 missiles, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
999.
They hated him.
Yeah, they couldn't cheat him, I guess.
Right. He increased the army's efficiency, fought with corrupt and crony armament producers. As a result, he became extremely unpopular, made tons of powerful enemies, and was ousted in 2012, along with everybody who worked for him.
Okay.
So then he had a successor. His successor's named Shoigu, Shoygu.
He's the name in the news now.
Now,
he's there.
He's the one where you see pictures.
Yes.
Where the caption is, he's sitting next to Putin, and the thought balloon in the caption is something along the lines of, how do I avoid a purge? But it's not just a cute meme. There's a lot of meaning to that, and this guy explains it. Now, Shoigu is the only single Russian minister who uninterruptedly worked in government since 1991.
Oh.
Since the beginning of the Russian Federation. He worked for all the presidents, all the prime ministers, avoided all the purges. So what does that mean? He's cunning. He's a political entrepreneur. Basically, he's a courtier.
Okay.
Right? He's a palace intrigue guy. And to max that survivability, you got to minimize animosity. That means he never challenged the oligarchs. So if they wanted to cheat the Russian army, go ahead.
Okay, I see.
Right? So his predecessor, Serdyukov, fought with interest groups and was destroyed. Shoigu was smarter than that. He launched a PR campaign presenting himself as the savior from the older guy's legacy.
Oh. Whatever
his predecessor did was dismantled. Media cheered, our analyst writes. People cheered. Interest groups cheered. And that's a pretty typical problem. There's another issue here. Shoigu is ethnic Tuvan.
Yeah, the name is...
In a country like Russia, minority members don't become supreme leader. Therefore, Putin tends to trust him more because he's not looking to stab Putin in the back and replace him. So that's one of the reasons why he survives.
I mean, I guess so. Not himself.
So Shoigu
anyway.
Not only purged the old guy's appointees, pandered to old military establishments, stopped arguing with army suppliers about equipment cost and quality, He also pandered to numerous feel-good lies regarding the Russian big strategy. So consider the Army versus the Navy problem.
Oh.
You know all about that, Army versus Navy. We have a football game to decide supremacy.
Do they have one too?
Well, they have both an Army and a Navy, and that's okay when you're the USSR and have incredible amounts of resources. But Russia, which is a large gas station run by a mob boss, doesn't have the money to sustain both.
Oh.
So Army versus Navy has been a traditional dilemma of European powers for centuries. As a rule, you can't support both first-class Army and first-class Navy unless you have the resources of the United States. You have to choose, right? And some powers didn't do this and got clobbered, like 17th, 18th century France. Others were more rational, like Prussia, went for the Army, not the Navy. And we kind of forgot this, but in the 17th century, the Principality of Brandenburg, centered in Berlin, tried to be a global maritime power, start colonies, super costly, super stupid, consumed tons of resources in vain, and they reconsidered. They sold the colonies, dismantled the Navy, started land maxing, and that's one of the reasons that Germany wound up being unified, because they land maxed. Got rid of the Navy. Right? I mean, so land maxing requires minimizing naval ambition. Does Russia minimize its naval ambition? No. It feels obligated to maintain as much Soviet naval legacy as possible. Keep old ships afloat. Build new ones, which they're not that good at. Maintain and expand infrastructure for the ocean navy, which takes resources away from the Army. So what you wind up with is a mix of old and new ships with not necessarily compatible parts. Technicians who need to be trained in both, which may or may not happen.
Yeah.
And that's what happens in the Army. So the Army winds up having like 17 different generations of vehicles. May or may not be compatible. You got to keep them all going. And so on paper it looks good, and in reality breaks down a lot.
Okay.
Which we are seeing in Ukraine.
Right.
Okay. Here's another dilemma. He writes, regional fleet, and I don't pretend to be a military expert. I'm just going by this analysis, which matches a lot of other stuff that I've been reading with people who do know what they're talking about. Regional fleets can be effectively used in land wars. For example, Russia declared Navy maneuvers and attacked Ukraine from the sea, which is cheap and effective. But keeping that kind of fleet means that you have to keep those ships up. Putin declared the share of new ships should reach 70% by 2027, and old Soviet ships are becoming obsolete, and Russia's building new ones, but the Soviet shipyards are in Ukraine.
Oh, whoops.
So Russia now has to expand their own shipyard infrastructure to reach this goal, again, taking resources away from the Army.
Okay. Yes.
So a lot of things have happened over the years that makes it not the Army you'd think it is. It doesn't have the resources. So how does this reflect on the war? First, Russian invading force is small. It has lots of artillery, but it's not numerous enough to win. Pro-Russian analysts compare their advance with Barbarossa and blitzkrieg tactics that the Nazis used. But unlike 1941, Russian invaders have only one echelon of troops. In other words, the idea is you need three. The first echelon moving forward fast as they can. You leave defenders behind. The second echelon comes, cleans up. They finish defenders, occupy territory, control the supply lines with a third echelon. Russia only has one. There's no backup. So when you send a smaller than you're supposed to unit with a bunch of military conscripts who were never told where they were going and what they were supposed to do.
Yeah, that sounds like it's becoming a problem. Maybe.
And then, invade, let's say, the second largest city and get turned back. There's nobody to back them up. And again, this isn't just, this is all speculative. This is what's happening on the ground there. Now, why didn't Russia prepare a proper blitzkrieg? Now we come to the third and main reason. It's a war strategy. But they're not actually campaigning for winning a war. This is a special ops, something that Putin does. Smaller group goes in, does this, does that. You never really fought a war. Most people of our generation haven't. And wasn't prepared for it. You go in, lightning fast, take what you need, kill what you need to, intimidate everybody. That's special ops.
Yeah, I guess so.
The whole idea of taking over a country and then having a second, third waves of supply lines, this, that, the big war kind of stuff, they weren't set up for that. And so when the Ukrainian resistance turned out to be more than they expected, and they didn't get what they wanted, and Ukraine didn't flee, and they didn't find that the Ukrainians would turn on their own government that they didn't like, and so on and so forth, they're stuck.
Yeah.
They're stuck in the mud, literally stuck in the mud.
It is literally true.
So what happens now? That's where it gets dangerous.
Oh, now?
Okay, because,
now,
all right,
finally.
It's not going the way they want, so what do?
Yes,
That's why there are peace talks, which may or may not be peace talks, but you have to give Putin some sort of off-ramp, because there's certainly enough military power, even with older equipment and, all the issues of logistics that they have, to, for example, shell the cities and kill a lot of civilians.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's the only alternative he has, he may use it. Because the alternative would be to say we lost, and he's not going to do that.
Yeah. Well, okay. And the other alternative
and that's why it's so dangerous right now. He's clearly losing on the ground, but hasn't lost, and hasn't declared he lost, and may never declare he loses. And so you can do a lot of damage before you get to the point where, things happen, whatever those things are to be, which you can't read the future on. This isn't the prediction of how it plays out. This is an analysis of where we are right now. Mm-hmm. So Putin played the badass, this analyst writes, even before becoming president, and he's initiated conflicts, small ones, Chechnya, Georgia, Syria, but they were all special ops things, not big wars, for political goals against small forces. This is different, and it's not working the same way. So he screwed up. Now what? Anybody with an IQ above room temperature knows the war's not over, and Russians are going to strike again, but what now?
Yes. They may not have echelons, but there'll be a second wave. Like the pandemic, this war isn't over yet.
Right. So Ukraine has had 6 drafts. Men were drafted and sent to Donbass. Okay. Most demobilized and returned to civilian life, but they're trained. They can go back. Many of them were in combat. Ukraine has huge numbers of veterans with combat experience, probably more than Russia. Oh. Russia's now talking about conscripting people who have never fought before and may not want to go. That's certainly happening in Belarus.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And the combat they've seen is different. Russian soldiers, this analyst says, are used to fighting only when they have total superiority, like in Syria. Meanwhile, Ukrainian soldiers have fought only against far stronger and better equipped enemies. So they basically trained for this.
Yes, well.
So that's part of the reason why the Ukrainian army is better than predicted, and why the Russian army is worse than predicted, and that's why Kyiv hasn't fallen yet.
Okay. I think that all makes a certain amount of sense. I've heard all of those stories. I try to, take each one with a grain of salt, but it sounds like some of them are holding up. It appears to be the case. A lot of Russian
we shouldn't underestimate the
Russian
forces that are there. They're large. Yeah. They're deadly.
Right.
There's a lot that's still going to happen. But then there's the second front.
Okay? Online.
This is Richard Fontaine writing.
Okay.
Since the invasion began, the scale and rapidity of geopolitical shifts have been astonishing already. Russia's moved from a sullen revisionist state to a clear and present danger. Governments have no trust in or tolerance for Putin at this point. The world's major economies, except for China, have combined to foment a financial crisis in Russia. The ruble fell at least 30% when it opened today.
Yes, right.
Casting aside the previous worries about systemic economic risk, that in turn may provoke domestic unrest with unknown implications in Russia. Germany, this is great. Putin has finally achieved the this is me talking, the overarching goal he's had his entire life.
Oh.
Which is to rearm Germany.
Okay.
Germany has moved from a pacifist laggard on defense spending to announcing a huge increase. They're doubling their defense budget, moving ahead at 2% in the GDP. We must put a stop to warmongers like Putin, the new chancellor says. That requires strength of our own. This guy's a pacifist, more on the green side, more left than anybody that Germany has seen for a while. There are Greens in the government as part of the coalition. This is astounding.
Yeah, well, that was something that struck me over the weekend. Trump tried mightily to insist that Germany had to double its spending as it's part of its...
Well, Putin got it to do it.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Couldn't get it done.
I knew what they had to do, and they should have listened to me.
He couldn't get it done, but Biden, he came in, he got it done. I mean, that's the way he would have sold it, of course, if he were... But if you were
Finland and Sweden, he writes, are firmly aligned with the West and against Moscow, and the invasion may tip them into NATO. And Switzerland, which is neutral, isn't so neutral. They're talking about freezing Russian assets.
Yeah,
talk about losing Krakow. When you lose Switzerland.
Yeah, that's true. They usually are assiduously neutral and refuse to help anybody at all.
Not this case. The sanctions response has been global with Japan, South Korea, Australia, Singapore. And China is badly exposed, having trumpeted a no-limits friendship with Russia. It's openly siding not with the numerous wealthy, powerful, and unified countries opposing Moscow, but with a reckless country that's being isolated and impoverished. So they're backing off China. They're saying, well, you can't compare this to Taiwan because it's different. Yes. So we're going to abstain at the UN rather than vote with Moscow.
Yeah, that's true. I have seen... they've created a lot of problems for themselves, and
the European Union, which for 2 decades has talked about taking on military role, suddenly providing EU-funded fighter jets to Ukraine.
Yeah,
and all of this happened over the weekend, and there's a lot more to come.
There's
a lot more to come to the show too, which we'll talk about after the break.
Yes, well, there's plenty to go, and there's lots of facets to all these things. But it is true there was some major shifts over the weekend. We usually don't have to catch up on this much. It's usually about this country, but it's happening here too.
There's my abbreviated roundup of what happened.
Except for Lauren Boebert, who thinks it's all the action's still in Canada.
Yeah, we'll get to that too.
Hi everyone, it's me, Gil. Minimal contributor to content, but regular contributor to funding for Kagro in the morning. Let's change things up from David's so very tired plea for your contributions with a plea of my own. If you want to add your voice to the show, do it. Record your own segment using your favorite recording device and send it to David. Read an article and give your opinion. Write your own essay and read that. The sky's the limit. Well, not really. Try to keep it relatively short so David doesn't have to stress about cutting it and hurting your feelings. Join the hallowed ranks of Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter and be part of this somewhat witty deep dive into political topics with unnecessary censoring. Lend your voice to the show by sending it to kagrox@gmail.com. KAGROX@gmail.com.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's continue with the seismic shifts over the weekend thanks to Ukraine, which I learned was pronounced, I guess, Ukraine. I heard somebody was talking up Ukrainian folk music over the weekend. Everything, lots of pro-Ukraine propaganda going on. What does Ukrainian folk music sound like? And I'm not certain whether I struck on what
Saturday
they thought.
Night Live had the chorus on.
Oh.
That's their opening.
I missed that.
Yeah.
I was busy looking at wars. I forgot to look at the comedy
show.
So
I think it's important because Trump actually made a statement to remind people of, I would like you to do us a favor call, which was, in fact, about trying to blackmail Zelensky by withholding javelins, which they need right now, in order for Zelensky to dig up dirt on Hunter Biden.
Yes, lots of great pictures of the patriotic Ukrainian fighters, all of whom Trump would have killed for a couple extra votes.
Yeah, pretty much. So just keep that in mind. Nadav Ayal out of Israel notes, for the first time we see the world of globalization dismembering an important part of it because it broke too many rules. Russia's increasingly excluded from international trade, money markets, air travel, and circle of legitimacy. So you can try to, keep this from the Russian people by turning Twitter off, for example. But when you find that there's a run on the bank and you can't fly anymore, then Russia citizenry notices.
Yeah, even the oligarchs who have sort of depended on the ability to just, with all their money, have whatever Western luxuries they wanted shipped to them overnight via FedEx and Amazon, and suddenly they're just not shipping to you anymore, and nobody's taking your rubles.
So the thing is that globalization was seen as soft power enticement to stick with the world order, because the consequences would be severe, and those consequences weren't used. This Russia took a little nibble of this and a bite of that, took Crimea, took Georgia, that kind of thing. But when it's actually used, it's incredibly powerful, and Russia's finding that out now.
Yeah. Well, good.
And when I say Russia, I mean the Kremlin and I mean Putin.
Yes.
But also their citizenry.
Yeah,
so
well, they're finding out too.
Putin's going to have a lot of issues domestically, and that's really how this war ends. Interesting that Turkey called it a war.
Or killed.
By calling it a war, Turkey, if they want, gets to ban Russian Navy from the Black Sea.
Oh.
There's just so many moving parts here. And when you get your erstwhile troublemaker and or allies like Kazakhstan saying, I don't want any part of this. Or Turkey saying, I might have to side with NATO on this one, Vlad.
All right.
And China saying, best I can do is be neutral.
Yeah.
You've lost Concrete.
Okay.
When you lost Concrete, you lost the war. The question is, how do you get out of it from this point onward?
Yeah, well, that's what worries everybody. And
yes, because the shelling is going to increase, and there's going to be civilians that get killed. I mean, there's just no question about that, unfortunately.
Yeah. And then in the background,
which we should minimize.
Nuclear saber rattling as well, which
that doesn't worry me as much, simply because that's standard Soviet.
Yeah. It's
Cuban
not
Missile Crisis. They've been doing that for like 50 years. I grew up at that.
It's no fun to hear that. But it's worrisome in the sense that, gosh, we don't know. Is Putin
when Alexander
crazy?
Vindman tells me to worry, I'll worry.
All right.
The first thing he said is standard strategy.
Yeah.
Expected. Don't let that intimidate you. That's why they're doing it.
Okay. It was a little odd, certainly. Brought back some memories.
It's unexpected because you're not used to it.
Yeah.
And you're not used to it because this is different. And this is different because they've really overreached and made a whole bunch of mistakes. And what you don't want to do is back them in a corner where they feel like they have to do something. Otherwise, nobody will think I'm strong and nobody will respect us. So the best thing to do, as someone put it, is, make the country into ashes so I can at least rule the ashes.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know how lucrative that's going to be. That's one of the big problems is he doesn't, he's not running a country. He's running that gas station, as we've pointed out, the mobocracy. I thought a lot about the psychological aspect of it inside Russia. I don't know whether they're really experiencing this or not, but if his power is propped up by the cooperation of the oligarchs and they prop up his power because he's, lucrative and pays well and they make lots of money while he's in power and they begin losing control of their money or losing their money completely, business is bad. They don't necessarily want to align behind this mob boss anymore. And it looks to me like, I have no idea what's going on in his head, but he's certainly behaving, Putin, like he's beginning to realize whether it's real or it's just in his head, it doesn't really matter. He's behaving like a guy who thinks that his top officials / oligarchs / advisors might decide that he's not the boss anymore or maybe want to get rid of him.
So a lot of the Russian money
he's distancing himself from everybody. Yeah,
is parked in London in terms of real estate.
I
think it was Reuters. One of the wire services just had this snippet about London grad having to cut their ties with Russian money.
Okay,
which was actually pretty funny, given that it was a staid wire service that said this. Okay. So I want to turn to a slightly different angle on this.
Okay.
And that is from David Frum.
Oh, all right.
Who talks about the financial system, not that he's an expert, but he interviewed somebody who is. This is from The Atlantic. Can Putin recover from this? The Fed and the European Central Bank move hard, fast, and together.
All right.
Okay? And he does a little bit of an explainer about what's going on with the financial system, which I thought your readers might be interested in.
Sure, yeah. What we know is there's something called SWIFT, and it's bad for Russia.
Yeah, so details are still pending. To better understand the possibilities, Frum writes, I spoke with Michael Bernstam, an economist and Soviet-born analyst at the Hoover Institution, conservative institution. Yeah. Bernstam has studied the potentially decisive impact of sanctions since the prior Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2014.
Oh, okay. Not 1930.
Bear with me, says Frum, as I walk you through some banking and currency technicalities, but I promise the destination will be worth the trouble.
All right.
So let's see if he can keep his promise. Suppose you're a Russian company that buys things in the outside world and sells them to Russians. So you earn your income in rubles.
Okay.
But you spend in euros, US dollars, British pounds, Japanese yen, wherever you're buying stuff from to bring back to Russia.
Okay.
So how does that work exactly? Well, a Russian business or individual might convert the rubles into foreign currency at a Russian bank. But, the ruble tends to lose value a lot. So that Russian business or individual instead might set up an account at a Russian bank denominated in euros or dollars, which you can do in Russia.
Okay.
You open up a big account in a Russian bank, and, but you open it in dollars.
Okay. I open big account, I'll say, like that.
Okay.
It's totally
and there's an old quote that keeps popping up in my head as I read this David Frum story to keep in mind. Okay? If you,
me,
David Waldman,
Kagro
in the morning, owe $10,000 to the bank,
oh my God, what am I going to do?
You got a problem.
Yes.
Okay? If you, David Waldman, owe $10 billion to that same bank,
oh, it's easy.
The bank has a problem.
Right. Yeah, I win.
Okay, so, because you won't pay it, and that's the end of that, but the bank is stuck.
Called Donald Trump.
Yes.
All
so most of these conversions from rubles into foreign currency take the form of computer clicks that credit or debit the electronic ledgers, and the deposit of rubles into a bank is a click. And the sale of rubles into dollars is another click.
Click.
So the arrival of the foreign country into the Russian customer's account is another click, and very seldom does any actual paper money change hands.
All right.
Right? Because there's only about $12 billion of actual dollars inside Russia.
Only 12 billion. But okay.
But we're talking about, 100 billion, 200 billion. We're talking about petrodollars.
They think they have lots of dollars, but they don't. Okay.
Right? Against that, the Russian private sector has about 65 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And there are larger claims on Russian state-owned companies. But despite the relative scarcity of physical foreign currency, all the clicks can happen because Russians generally have confidence that their banks could pay foreign cash if they had to. If every Russian depositor, individual, corporate, state-owned, all showed up at the same time to claim the dollars, you'd have a bank run.
Okay, right.
But Russians don't do that because they think the central bank will supply all the needed cash. They have 630 billion in reserves. Not 12 billion in actual cash, 630 billion.
They think they do.
Okay. But wait.
Bernstam,
the expert, says, what does it mean that Russia has X or Y in foreign reserves? Where do they exist? Russia may own them, but they don't control them because they're all in foreign banks.
Oh.
So Russia's reserves exist as notations in the European Central Bank and the Federal Reserve. Most of Russia's reserves are actually IOUs to the Russian government from Western governments. Okay. We, the people of the Western world, collectively owe the Russian state hundreds of billions of dollars. That's not our problem. That's Russia's problem, an enormous one.
Right.
Because one thing any debtor can do is not pay.
It happens.
So how do you pay for the war? Well, all this requires the cooperation of the Fed or European Central Bank in the first place. They could say, no, sorry, Russian Central Bank's money's frozen. No transfers of dollars. SWIFT is a communication system to allow one bank to speak to another bank. Without SWIFT, you can't do it by just a click.
I see.
That's where SWIFT comes in.
Even if you do speak to them by SWIFT, they could say no, I guess, at the other end.
Right.
But you can't even ask them if you don't have access.
Right.
Okay.
So this is where the sanctions come in, and that's why they work. But here we bump into the limits of central bank sanctions as a financial weapon, a weapon that altogether crushes an adversary's banking system, may be too powerful. The West wants to administer penalties that cause Russia to alter its behavior, not to crush the Russian economy. And the central bank weapon is so strong, it might crush the economy, and then Putin's really desperate. So is there any way to use the central bank sanctions more incrementally? And that's what you've seen Biden do, which, by the way, have to add, Biden is doing this incredibly well. Talking to all of the European allies, the Asian allies, getting them to take the lead. You don't even see his name up there. He's not the one beating his chest. It gets done. He doesn't get credit, but it gets done. He's doing it perfectly. He's organizing this. He's getting the United States government on the same page. You don't hear infighting here. Would have been a disaster if Trump were president. But that goes without saying on this show. But it's true. Right. Trump couldn't even get his own allies to be on the same page.
He can't do it now.
In his own cabinet, in his own government. Can't do it now. But Biden's getting the world to do it, which is amazing. Whether or not he gets credit for it, that's a different issue.
Yeah.
But anyway,
maybe he doesn't need
there might be a way to do this incrementally. Western banks don't need to freeze the Russian central bank's accounts altogether. They could put the Russian bank on an allowance.
Yeah, I guess.
That keeps them going along, but under restraint. And it's, so you could
yeah, you don't leave them in a place where they're, we got nothing to lose. We might as well throw everything we've got at them militarily because.
But this is the second front. Yeah. And so the central bank sanctions also let Putin know you can't win this. You may think that you could, destroy civilians in cities and therefore get some sort of win before you withdraw on the ground. You can't win this. You will lose and you will be crushed. So keep in mind, this is a message reminding you you have no leverage here on the second front. Everything is on the first front. So the power, Frum writes, that Putin is about to feel is the power of producers against gangsters, of governments that inspire trust against governments that rule by fear. Russia depends on the dollar, the euro, the pound, and other currencies in ways that few around Putin could comprehend, especially that guy who, stays in power by, letting the oligarchs steal from the army. The liberal democracies that created these trusted currencies are about to make Putin's cronies feel what they never troubled to learn. So squeeze them, he says. And you know what? That's what's happening. And that's why Switzerland, nominally neutral, is saying, okay, I'll consider it.
Okay, sure. Well, that is very interesting. And it answers some of the questions we had over the weekend, possibly answers some of those questions that people said, why aren't they taking the maximalist approach? Why wouldn't you do this, that, and the other thing that I have imagined that central banking systems could do, and maybe they can do? And part of the answer is, we're trying to ratchet things up so that they're not always with their back against the wall with nothing to lose. They have a lifeline, and the more they adhere to the usual international standards of peaceful interaction,
you need a carrot and a stick.
Better
you can't just have a stick. That's the way into a big war.
All right, that makes some sense. I know there was a lot of clamoring, say, for instance, and they could still do this because it doesn't impact the central banks in the same way, but everyone became experts in finding and seizing
all the pandemic
yachts.
Experts all became financial experts and foreign policy experts, which was great.
Yeah, and asset seizure experts.
Right.
True.
And I saw one true foreign policy. I've been reading the foreign policy experts, and that's why I'm giving you the report I'm giving you. It's a book report on what they've said, not my own analysis. But still,
you can pretend it was.
I don't know that it's true until the political analysts in this country give it that must be true then. Right? Because the political analysts in this country go from, I know how to read a poll, to I'm an expert on pandemics, to I'm an expert on the world financial system, to I'm an expert on how, all of these foreign governments are relating to each other.
Well, they learn quickly that the expertise is in how to get a media company to pay you as an expert.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so good. You say you're an expert in things. Yeah, there's been a lot of that going around.
Who is a true expert, is a foreign policy expert, writes, You have to give Trump credit for trying to build a bridge between the Putin wing of the GOP and the Hitler wing of the GOP.
I guess.
Because that's what he did at CPAC. You were talking about CPAC.
Right. Well, that's, yeah.
Meanwhile,
it's very weird.
Yes. A Republican-focused media company, Politico, writes this morning, quote, "It was Biden and his team's patience and close consultation with European allies that's led to the extraordinary unity now on display," end quote.
Oh, my God. What's Trump going to say? Well, I figured out what Trump's going to say. He denies it. It's all him. But, yeah, that's really interesting. They usually don't do that. Or I would imagine that they would have said, well, Biden lucked into it somehow. It happened despite him. But no. All right.
Bill Barr has a new book. The election was not stolen, Barr writes. Trump lost it.
Yeah.
And he looks to an impressive array of younger candidates who share Trump's agenda but not his erratic behavior, writes Barr. And John Harwood reminds us the Trump agenda Barr salutes here is actually related to current events, including deriding NATO, embracing Putin, squeezing Ukraine. And those are all related to the Mueller investigation that Barr worked to discredit. So again, the first impeachment.
Yes, the important one. They're both important, but yeah.
Right. Brian Schatz, member of Congress, Democrat, says, "I don't think everybody remembers that Zelensky was the leader on the other end of the 'I want you to do me a favor, though' phone call. Yeah. I sense the first impeachment sounded kind of obscure to some people, but withholding lethal aid was both an actual crime and a moral crime." And Rachel Vindman, Alexander Vindman's wife, says, "I remember."
Yeah, well, sure, you remember. You had a front row seat.
Oh, and while CPAC was going on, don't forget, there's a parallel conference that also goes on with Nick Fuentes and the white supremacists who aren't allowed at CPAC because they're too extreme.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
I noticed that it was going on. And
so who goes there?
Remember, I said,
Paul Gosar went last year. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Marjorie three names, as George Takei calls her. And Wendy Rogers, who said that white nationalists are patriots and call for hanging political enemies.
Yes, and it's the season for calling for hanging political enemies.
But here's the funny part of that.
Yes,
you expect Rogers to go. She's an idiot. She's a wacko right wing white nationalist, right? You expect Gosar to go, and you know what you're getting. Marjorie Taylor Greene goes and claims that she didn't know it was a white nationalist conference, so they've deserted her and said she's a poser, she's a faker.
Well, good. She never knows anything.
Joe Arpaio goes. And here's from the article from the Arizona Mirror, which I have in the pundit roundup.
I heard about Arpaio, yeah.
Later in the evening, former Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio gave a rambling 40-minute speech in which he seemingly didn't realize he was speaking to a crowd of white nationalists.
What?
At times, he seemed taken aback at the reaction. "I have the reputation of being the biggest racist in the country," he said, to robust applause. And he turned to the audience and said, "What are you clapping for?"
Did he
that
really
I am? Or that I'm not? Well, I'm not.
I don't.
So a lot less applause for that. And when he repeated he was called the biggest racist in the country, he added, "I have a black grandkid. I got a Mexican grad kid." Boos from the crowd. Right? And at another point, Arpaio boasted about having a howitzer while sheriff.
What? All right.
Everyone said, this is Arpaio talking, everyone said, "What are you using this for?" I said, "To shoot people."
Yeah.
Eliciting raucous cheers from the crowd that left Arpaio doubly surprised. It's to shoot people that come across the border. I mean, illegally. I didn't mean to shoot the illegals coming across. I'm saying the illegals that are terrorists, if they shoot at me, I'm going to shoot back. A lot fewer cheers. I'm not about to shoot illegals or coming across just for coming across. No cheers.
Huh. What a confusing situation. Just generally, I didn't think that he would say anything like that. I'm not just going to shoot illegals just for being illegals. Well, why not? I thought you were all about it's an invasion and I got to stop them and only I can fix it sort of thing. And I'm surprised that he said that.
When you have a conference where Arpaio is the reasonable grown-up.
Yeah, or bomb the conference is the answer.
And Marjorie Taylor Greene claims she has no idea, which of course is a lie.
Neutron bomb, yes. Right. Although
her lie didn't work because they deserted her. Sometimes you say to yourself, "I know she's lying. Why don't they know she's lying?" Well, in this particular case, they do.
I guess so. That only means that they're really genuine in their
They're genuine. They're dangerous.
Yeah. Well, that is something. She always is claiming not to know these things. It was like 2 weeks ago, she was explaining the Jewish space laser thing, saying, well, I didn't know, right, I heard that they were controlled, these space lasers, by the Rothschild family. I just didn't know that the Rothschilds were Jewish. It's the central tenet.
And anytime I said something like that, I get, set upon by the Gazpacho police.
Right. So, but she's constantly saying, I didn't know this and I didn't know that. And, I guess it's possible.
And like a normal person would stop talking if you don't know stuff.
Yeah, or check on things. Why don't I stop making this mistake? Yeah. Well, she knew where she was going, of course. And, but she didn't realize that she would be, I don't know, I guess she's finally thinking that the world is turning her way, and as crazy as she is, she actually does have some sort of internal control mechanism. She doesn't go as far as she could. I mean, I guess she probably looks at Wendy Rogers and says, "Well, I'm not that crazy."
No, she looks at Wendy Rogers and says, "Why is Wendy Rogers getting all that attention?"
Yeah, now she figures that out.
Now I better go there. So let me just end with a summary of everything we talked about over the last hour. This is Michael Cohen, SpeechBoy71 on Twitter. Again, from the Pundit Roundup. No recent event has done more to galvanize and unite Europe than the situation in Ukraine. Broad support for punishing sanctions, and now Germany increasing its defense budget. In one fell swoop, Putin has undermined decades of efforts to divide Europe's strategic genius, my ass. For all the people saying Putin has undermined the international order, the international order is demonstrating the very real downside of trying to undermine it. Globalization is bad, except when it's good.
That's true.
This is when it's good.
We're going to own those globalists.
Well, globalists and globalization are different things. Globalization is a concept, flat world, Tom Friedman kind of stuff. Globalist is anti-Semitic slur when you don't want to say out loud what everybody at this conference that Wendy Rogers and Marjorie Three Names attended is saying out loud.
Yeah. Wow. All right.
So don't confuse them.
I'll try not to. How interesting. I wonder what they would have. I'm thinking about Lauren Boebert spending her time at CPAC complaining that they had to. We should be invading Canada because
she was at the wrong conference.
People. Yeah,
she should have been at the other one.
I guess so. It's interesting that. Well, I guess she's still welcome at the CPAC one. I don't know what she has to do to get kicked out of that, but I guess it's harder now. I imagine because they think they've seen it all. But I wonder what the reaction at CPAC would be. What if you crack down on what do they call this other white nationalist conference? Do we have a name for it?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah,
it involves Nick Fuentes. That's all I need to know.
Yeah, they didn't tell. I mean, I think they had an acronym, and I think it might even have been on the podium. But that's very interesting that nobody came away with that name on
Ron Brownstein. Can anyone really argue that the West would have produced this level of organized response if Trump were in office and belittling allies, praising Putin, and denigrating international institutions after extorting Zelensky and falsely claiming Ukraine interfered against him?
I would find that
he did that too.
And yet. Right. He has no problem making that claim. Right. It is unusual, but that's Trump.
Oh, it's the America First conference, I think.
Okay. Just
America First. That's why it didn't stick.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Matt Gaetz was about the America First conference. Said we cannot allow it to be the Rorschire test.
Oh, yes.
Where everybody sees what they want to in the ink blot. ROURKSHIRE. The Rorschire test.
Now, granted, I understand he means Rorschach test, but I can't make heads or tails of the rest of the sentence.
Right. Well, as Robert Schlesinger wrote on Twitter, somebody report him to the Gazpacho police.
This was a big weekend for that stuff. What's the other guy? From Louisiana, Clay Higgins, is it?
Yeah.
He had a tweet too where it sounded like he was trying to get. I don't know whether he was doing search engine optimization or what, but he made some sort of tweet in which he levels accusations against, wokeism and gender fluidity and pronouns and millennials and I think he got taken to the cleaners too. There it is, Clay Higgins, the big response that everybody loved. His quote was, "You millennial leftists who never lived one day under nuclear threat, okay, can now reflect upon your woke sky." I'm losing you. You made quite a non-binary fuss. What? To save the world from intercontinental ballistic tweets. And generally the reaction was, are you having a stroke? Are you okay? And best one I saw was dictionary.com. You probably saw this one saying, we're not entirely sure what this tweet is supposed to mean, and we're literally the dictionary.
Well, funny you should bring that up. I got a Teddy Wilson piece, which I had on the Pundit Roundup.
He's literally Teddy Wilson.
From Twitter.
Yeah.
Okay. Why do white evangelical Christians in the U.S. embrace Vladimir Putin? It's complicated. Not everybody does, of course. But
go ahead.
Generally, white evangelical Christians do not embrace the idea of a melting pot. This view of America as fundamentally the birthright of white evangelical Christians informs their embrace of Putin, who's viewed by white evangelical Christians as protecting racial, ethnic, and religious integrity from outsiders, Muslims, LGBTIQ people.
Oh.
Right?
All right.
So keep that in mind when he's talking about that. That's why one of the funnier things I saw on Twitter was this meme. Picture of an American tank painted purple with they, them on the side, functioning.
Yes.
That's an American tank. And then a burned out Russian tank in Ukraine. So which military do you want?
I guess. Yeah. Well, you'll have to send me that one.
And why is that funny? It's funny because of this.
Yeah.
This is why Clay Higgins writes that crap. That's what he meant.
I see. Yeah, they're trying to. They tried to throw back to an old joke they were making about woke militaries, and now we're never going to be able to defeat the Russians this way. The Russians are doing fine defeating themselves. They didn't depend on our anything, much less whether or not somebody somewhere tweeted with pronouns. Unbelievable. Okay, well, thanks. I'll take a look at that one. Is the purple tank
I'll send that
in that one? Okay. Why not? People will want to see it. Well, thanks, Greg. You'll be back on Wednesday. I'm guessing war's still going on at that point.
Yeah, going to be a lot more civilians killed, I think, today and tomorrow, unfortunately.
Okay. This is the real downside. All right, we're ready for reality.
Yep.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Man, there's a lot going on here, and I don't know. We might overlap with a lot of the things that Greg told us, and then we might have to jump off of the topic entirely and look at some other things still going on. Can't take your eye off of every ball to focus entirely on what's going on in Ukraine, which I'm just so thrilled. I've been learning the pronunciation, I guess, in their own language, listening to that Ukrainian folk music, and that's the one letter or one word I could actually recognize in all of that. Very interesting stuff, too, and like I said, I'm not sure I hit upon what the author of that one tweet about Ukrainian folk music or Ukrainian traditional music was talking about, but I saw some things with some translations. And I guess some of the big hits, the top of the charts for Ukrainian folk music songs, pro-Ukrainian, patriotic songs. Of course, they have a bit of a military bent, and some of them pretty grim, the wording. I wonder about the direct translations. But also, by the way, just sort of interesting watching along and reading the wording of it and glorifying of native Ukrainian fighting prowess, though that, depended in historical context on their Cossack forces, who, mixed record with the Cossacks for a lot of people. So it was a little odd to read about that, but boy, there was some grim translations to it. I don't know what the the translated name of the song was, but if you go and you look at if you take a look on YouTube, you look on the YouTube and you ask about Ukrainian folk music, and up comes a couple of these songs, these patriotic songs, and some of them are the complaints about Cossacks being captured and killed they pin it on Muslims. So I guess they're talking about fighting with the Ottoman Empire, it would be my guess. And, well, a few complaints here and there about the various methods of torture that were used, including, let's see, hanging people on hooks, impaling them on spikes, boiling them in tar. This is like patriotic, Ukrainian music. It's difficult to take, but if you don't get the translation, it just sounds like interesting, upbeat singing to an accordion, which is always fun. But man, there's some real historical pathos involved there. Anyway, speaking of, I guess, how about fake historical pathos? And it's not that historical, it's the last couple of years. Greg mentioned that Trump has issued a statement taking a credit for all the things that it would be impossible for people with a real memory of the last couple of years to give him credit for. The statement that's put out, how he does this thing, he types it up and puts it on. I guess he puts it on his Truth Social thing, which hasn't actually launched yet. But then they put it on all the, neo-Nazi versions of Twitter that are out there. And then everybody, the reporters see it there because they monitor it, and then they take screenshots, and then they move it to Twitter. So he's not really banned from Twitter, but he doesn't get to interact with people, but just as well. Anyway, his statement, I hope everyone is able to remember that it was me, as President of the United States, that got delinquent NATO members to start paying their dues, which amounted to hundreds of billions of dollars. And, of course, he didn't get that, and that was part of the thing that entertained me most over the weekend, was that he kept insisting that the Germans had to pay. They had to start spending 2% of their GDP on defense, I don't know, or else something. And they didn't, because they don't care. Screw you, Orange Man. We're not doing it. Well, now they're doing it. Now you could say it's because of the Ukrainian, or rather the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and it is, except, unless you, in order to come to that conclusion, you have to discount the first 8 years of the invasion of Ukraine. But hey, who's counting? And now they're doing it, and he says, oh, I'm the one that drove them to do that. Now, of course, it happened under Biden, and well over a year into Biden's term, but whatever. It's still Trump somehow. And they were very pointedly not doing it when Trump was demanding it, and now they're doing it. And on the other hand, Greg did point out, well, maybe he should be taking credit for it. I supported Putin so long and so hard, I guess, we'll just say it that way, that I created a monster and then he invaded Ukraine, and now that invasion, the second one, is moving Germany to fully fund their obligation to NATO. So all I did was invade them, or encourage someone else to invade them. That taught them the lesson. So I guess you could think of it that way. But he goes on to say, there's more, because I hope everyone is able to remember it was me that got them to pay the dues. Then this, there would be no NATO if I didn't act strongly and swiftly. You, of course, remember that during his term in office, he said things like the United States should withdraw from NATO. We should dissolve NATO. There should be no NATO. NATO is stupid. It's horrible. There would be no NATO if it wasn't for me. Also, it was me that got Ukraine the very effective tank busters, the Javelin missiles, when the previous administration was sending blankets. So let history so note. That sounds very, I like the flourish. Probably one of his weirdly named assistants threw that one in there for him. I doubt that history will note that. And of course, what people do remember, if they remember anything about the impeachment, is that you weren't giving them those things. You were holding those things hostage in exchange for what you had hoped was dirt on Joe Biden. So I do remind everybody over the weekend, every time you see those pictures of, allegedly, pictures of patriotic Ukrainians volunteering to fight, remember that Trump would have seen them all killed if he thought it would have helped him in the election. He was pro their death if he got to be elected, quote unquote, elected president again, or for the first time, depending on how you want to view it. So that's rather disturbing, considering how crazy he is. But yeah, it would have gone very differently with him in office. All right, what other things have I put aside? All right, yeah, I put aside one explainer on the bank thing, although I really think that Greg's piece did a pretty good job of that, and we don't really need to venture into this tweet. I can jump out of this one. One of the things that we have here, I'm trying to identify these things all over again because, you know, they don't get put into Pocket quite quickly. Ah, yeah, here we go. Something I wanted to note, but I waited until Greg was done because he really had a ton of stuff to get through. But speaking of the Russian military and who's there under whose command and whether they're trained or not, remember that there's also Russia's got its proclivity being a mobocracy. They're not opposed to, we're not yet a mobocracy, but we're not opposed to using mercenaries either. So, you know, we don't get off the hook entirely for that one. But along the way in this thread from Tim Mock, M-A-K, Tim Mock, the NPR investigative correspondent, speaking on this subject, says there are hundreds of Russia-aligned mercenaries from the Wagner Group, a private military company, and I believe we've called their name at least once on the show at some point. Private military company operating in Kyiv, according to reports confirmed by an advisor to the Ukrainian Ministry of Internal Affairs. And again, you know, be wary of all the facts that are being verified by various officialdom. I'm worried about that. There's been some really interesting developments on Twitter of media outlets setting up Twitter accounts and other social media accounts solely for the purpose of sorting through various photos and videos that are being shared claiming to be from the conflict in Ukraine and illustrating one side's point or another and doing their best to debunk them, including if they're not real, that is, but doing their best to identify what they actually are pictures of. Are they in fact pictures of things taking place inside Ukraine? Are they in fact current pictures? Or are they current pictures from inside Ukraine but being offered in the wrong context? And it's very helpful in trying to sort through a lot of these things. And as usual, there are people who are unscrupulous about things. Either there could be mistakes being made, but they could also be intentional. There's lots of intentional propaganda efforts. Sometimes I can't really make heads or tails of those propaganda efforts and why they thought they were going to get away with this one or that one. But for instance, I did see something circulating earlier, but I didn't see the photo circulating for propaganda purposes first and then find out about the correction. I hadn't seen anything about the photo. I only saw the correction first. So, you know, that was useful. At least I didn't get fooled by the other photo. But one of them was purportedly a young Ukrainian girl confronting a Russian soldier and even, I think, slapping him, and, you know, they gave some sort of caption to it, and go back to Russia, and who knows what she told him. But it was, in fact, from several years ago, not very long ago, but a couple of years ago, and it is, in fact, a young Palestinian girl confronting an Israeli soldier and, you know, telling him, delivering much the same message. But why somebody thought they would get away with repurposing that as Ukraine and Russia, I don't know, but it didn't last very long. So I'm grateful for those accounts that are out there illustrating, even if I haven't seen these things and had a chance to either be fooled by them or debunk them myself. It's interesting to see what's circulating out there and how many such things that they are catching. So anyway, yeah, I mean, is Tim Mock right about mercenaries being used? Certainly could be true. The record exists. So, you know, whether the record is correct, I don't know, but we've heard about them being used in other conflicts in which Russia is directly involved. Let me see what the rest of this thread is about. This is just a couple of hours old here. Good morning from Ukraine. To those waking up on the East Coast, that would be our East Coast, Kyiv is still in Ukrainian hands, defying Western intelligence assessments that it would fall in a matter of a few short days. In the south, more land appears to be under Russian control. Russian and Ukrainian delegations are meeting on the border with Belarus to try to end the fighting, and some find find some diplomatic way, out of this conflict. Hopes are not high for a breakthrough. The Ukrainian government is seeking a ceasefire and withdrawal of Russian troops. Sure, why not? The Russians fundamentally want a Ukrainian government more aligned with Moscow and a pledge not to join NATO. They're very far apart. Belarus, where negotiators are meeting, is not exactly neutral territory. There have even been suggestions this morning that Belarus will join Russia in its invasion of Ukraine. I don't think we have seen that yet. There were some initial reports that perhaps they were sending some members of their military to assist in Ukraine, but it turns out, I believe, that it was Russian soldiers just moving through Belarus, either had been stationed there or were using it as a way station to get to a different part of Ukraine to affect their invasion. It's not good for relations between Ukraine and Belarus, certainly, but they have enough problems. So, anyway, yes, that is happening. Where were we? Where negotiators are meeting in Belarus. There was suggestions that Belarus might join Russia. Embedded in this tweet is the tweet of Jamie Detmer, who says U.S. intelligence expects Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko to order his army in the next few hours or days to participate fully with Russia in its invasion of Ukraine. According to messages sent to U.S.-linked NGOs, cities in the West are no longer regarded as safe. Okay. And there's a whole thread attached to that. But we'll jump back to Tim Mack, who says, within Kyiv, there has been a constant lookout for Russian saboteurs, the stated reason for the weekend curfew. The fear has been that they would try to decapitate the leadership in the capital city to install their own regime. Just straight up kill Zelensky. Then this first tweet that we read you about hundreds of Russia-aligned mercenaries for the Wagner Group are operating in Kyiv, according to reports confirmed by an advisor to the Ukrainian Ministry of Internal Affairs. The mercenaries have orders to assassinate Ukrainian President Zelensky and overthrow the current government. Could there be, could that work in the other direction? Could there be mercenaries hired to assassinate the other president and overthrow his government? I don't know. Sounds like the mobsters there could take care of that themselves. A symbol of Ukrainian national pride was destroyed, Tim Mock reports. Myria, M-Y-R-I-A, the world's largest cargo aircraft and made in Ukraine, was destroyed on a strategic airfield west of Kyiv that has changed hands multiple times between Ukraine and Russia. He says, I filed this short story on Myria. I'm just wondering, is that the gigantic plane or one like it that they used in the terrible movie 2012? Just wondering. The terrible movie I watched 150 times, by the way. Just point that out. I'm not above watching terrible movies. In case John Cusack is listening, you were fine, sir. It's just terrific. Anyway, I watched it 1,000,000 times. You can't fight with that. At any rate, here's the short story. Let's see. I guess this must be the transcript of Tim Mock on NPR here. The host saying, fierce fighting continues around Kyiv as defenders try to hold Russian troops from advancing further into Ukraine's capital city. In a hangar just outside the city, a symbol of Ukrainian pride was destroyed. NPR's Tim Mock reports on Ukraine's defiant reaction. I guess it's Maria. Oh, not Mirya. M-I. I think in the tweet it looked like he spelled it M-I-R, like Mir, like the Russian piece, right? With a Y-A, but it's M-R-I-Y-A here. And then there's a pronunciation, because on NPR they're like professional everything, and they give these pronunciation guides, which I guess is it's M''R-Y-A. Is that Maria, like Maria, the name, or is it Maria? Maria. Maria. I got no idea. But it's Ukrainian. The word is for the equivalent of dream, allegedly. If Tim Mock knows anything about anything. Let's see. And it's also the name of the world's largest cargo aircraft made in Ukraine, a source of national pride. Who knew? The plane was used to transport aid to Haiti and Japan after natural disasters, for example. The plane was on a strategic airfield that had been hotly contested by Ukrainian and Russian troops. Here's President Vladimir Zelensky mourning the loss. They play a clip. They gave a pronunciation for Vladimir. It's Volodymyr. Interesting. Okay, and Zelensky, they just leave it be. And I guess the quote is, "We lost our dream," the president said, "but the old dream, and we will build a new one." Okay, well, that seems rather less important than I thought it might be, but okay. Yes, and a different spelling in the tweet for some reason. Anyway, Tim Mock continues, "Morale is high. I had this exchange with a member of Ukraine's territorial defense here in western Ukraine." And the exchange goes like this. "If you had a message for the Russian military and Vladimir Putin, what would it be?" And the answer was, "Go home or you will die here." That is some message. Let's see. A couple other tweets here. Anything new that we should add? I guess not, although lots of reporting. Now the reporting beginning from out of, we'll see about how we're doing with the pronunciation of Kharkiv, Kharkiv, another of the major cities where there's some rather intensive fighting going on. And I guess in the days to come, like I said, before Wednesday, by the time Greg is back, the reality of the war will start setting in. And, all the glorious memes and interesting discussions of defiance will begin to be overshadowed by pictures arriving of the real cost. It's going to be real interesting to watch a war like this being fought in the time of social media. And there's going to be a lot of, there needs to be some revisions, I think, of the Geneva Conventions, because a lot of people are going to unwittingly be violating the Geneva Conventions by trying to document what's going on with the phone cameras that have been put in their hands, internet-capable phone cameras that will change everything. And, there are some rules governing the photography and the distribution of photographs of people who have been taken prisoner, of people who have been killed, etc., that professional journalists, I guess, are much more familiar with, and individuals might not be. It's going to be an interesting time. All right, let's see. Jump back into Pocket and see what else we put aside that was of interest. Back to the economic picture. This is something Greg tweeted around earlier, I think, and also was helpful in explaining some of the context for the economic fallout, the various things that can be brought to bear against Russia. And it reminds me that I also read a lot of stories that I couldn't, for my own hesitation to credit anything, I wasn't sure whether I was reading propaganda or not, but some very interesting stories about warfare in the modern social media context. For instance, things like stories, unverified, I don't know whether I believe them or not. I tend not to just because, but stories about, for instance, Russian troops being enticed into giving away their positions and or movements because they were on the front lines with their smartphones in tow, and that's really something that you should think about taking away from your frontline soldiers. And apparently they couldn't help but pass the time by looking through Tinder or similar apps and trying to see who was nearby and interested in a hookup. And I guess in some cases, certainly probably legitimate Ukrainian partners there answering them, or potential partners, but also sometimes people just posing as potential partners. And I guess the idea of Tinder is you're supposed to be able to co-locate and agree to a meetup, and they were using it as though there was no war going on, allegedly, and giving away the positions and movements of Russian troops, which of course would be very useful to the opposition. Whether or not that was really happening, I don't know. I saw other people debunking it, saying, no, they wouldn't be using Tinder. They have their own, Russians have their own dating app, knockoff dating app. They would have been using that. That sounds like that could be the truth. But various other similar stories, all difficult to give credence to. But this stuff here, Derek Thompson talking about more concrete things in the financial world, but again, giving you an idea of how interconnected things are and what, modern sanctions can really touch. Derek Thompson, staff writer for The Atlantic, as he explains in his Twitter bio, says this is a thread he's keeping to keep track of the economic fallout from this weekend's announced economic penalties for Putin and Russia. And he puts out the word, send me what you're seeing from reputable sources. Please keep it reputable. If you see anything and you want to send it to Derek Thompson, he's DK Tomp, like as in Thompson. He just drops the son for some reason. DKTHOMP. Got it? Okay. So here's what he's collected so far. This is a great explainer of the SWIFT cutoff, he adds first, and the central bank asset freeze from Noah Smith, who tweets as Noah Opinion, and has, I think, gotten himself in a little bit of trouble over the first weekend of the war, too, speculating about how he might react were he a Ukrainian stuck inside this situation. But in this case, it's not about that. But Noah writing his tweet thread and story on Substack, in which I try to explain the big gun sanctions of SWIFT cutoff and central bank asset freezing, how they work, what they're intended to accomplish, and what the difficulties are, and what the unintended consequences might be. Always good to look at the unintended consequences. Maybe I'll do that off air. But I think Greg gave us a great explainer earlier, so we'll skip that one and continue with Derek's other collections. Here's a tweet from Rafael Sanchez, foreign correspondent for NBC News, saying, my hotel in Moscow asked me to settle the bill early because they aren't sure if credit cards are going to work once SWIFT sanctions kick in. Hadn't thought about that one. That's pretty interesting, too. So, could inconvenience international travelers and Americans unintentionally, although the real inconvenience, I guess, is to the hotel that doesn't get paid. The only question is, what do they do with you? Is it the sort of thing that they say, well, it's not you, it's the banks, so whatever, we got to let you go and we're going to eat the loss? Or do they say, this is Russia, we will take you prisoner? I don't know whether they would really do such a thing or say it so stereotypically, but what if they do? That's kind of weird. Let's see. Next up, Julia Ioffi's missive here that Derek collects. She's saying here, by the way, expect to see a massive exodus from Russia, not from Ukraine. We're seeing that in terms of refugees, but from Russia. Why? Anyone with means and a passport is trying to get out right now. Many urban and educated Russians are horrified and terrified, and they know that they won't just face economic hardship at home, but political repression too. Lots of arrests reported for people who were brave enough to go out and protest the war. I think I will take a look at what she's got on her thread too, because it'll explain a little bit more about this exodus from Russia. But she goes on to say, please be kind to these people. They live in an authoritarian police state. No one asked their opinion or permission. Many of them are fleeing and staying. Some of them are staying. They oppose the war with every fiber of their being. Maybe. Or enough fibers, anyway. My social media, she says, is filled with Russians nauseous with rage at the Kremlin. That's why Greg keeps reminding you it's the Kremlin's war. My friends went to every protest. Their work has been all about criticizing the Russian government. Now many are fleeing, going literally anywhere they can go just to get out to safety. They are extremely upset, knowing that they are even they are forever culpable. And remember that too, because occasionally these people will show up as refugees elsewhere, and they may not even look like refugees because maybe they've escaped with a bunch of money, hard currency that they grabbed and taken along with them, and can pay for the creature comforts that they need. And you run into them, and you find out they're Russian, and you say, "You bastards! You invaded Ukraine." And they might then remind you, if they can keep their temper, the reason I'm here now, the reason you can see me, is because I have fled Russia because I don't want any part of this invasion of Ukraine. I can't take it anymore. I've left the country for that reason. Of course, any Russian, whether they support the invasion or not, could tell you that to escape the situation. But for many of them, that will be the truth. All right, let's see. A couple other things here, and my alarm's ringing, so it's time to jump out into the last break. But let me continue on with other things that Derek has discovered here. At the moment, he says, the ruble is trading like a Shibu-inspired cryptocurrency, with the tweet from BNO News. Breaking: Russian ruble down nearly 30% at record lows in early trading. So that seemed likely to happen, so I can believe that one. Let's see if we can fit in one more. Here's the tweet from Jim Packard, collected by Derek Thompson. Huge breaking news at BP. BP, British Petroleum, to exit its 20% stake in Russian oil giant Rosneft. Brexit from Rosneft. How do you like that? And then BP Chief Executive Bernard Looney. Really? Okay. To resign from the board of Rosneft with immediate effect. So all of their international ties dissolving as well. How interesting. And there's more. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. Let's continue with what Derek Thompson has been rounding up in terms of the perhaps unforeseen or less obvious economic fallout from sanctions against Russia. There is, of course, the impact on wheat prices, noting that Russia and Ukraine provide more than 10% of the wheat imports to much of the Middle East and parts of Africa and Southeast Asia. Sustained disruption of the wheat trade is real bad news for them, including a tweet in all caps, because that's the way they tweet over there in finance Twitter, about Chicago wheat futures and the price of the wheat crop. Then he continues on with more, this time with a quote from NBC News, with a photo of people standing in line, allegedly, to use an ATM machine in St. Petersburg, Russia, on Sunday. So, some information, some indication that there are, in fact, runs on Russian banks. And Derek noting about this one, Russia's military strategy seemed to involve besieging Kyiv. What's happening here is close to a siege of the Russian economy. Between the swift shutdown, slamming imports and exports, and the freezing of foreign reserves, Russia has been reduced to autarky, as he spells it here, A-U-T-A-R-K-Y, which is like, hey, that's an unfamiliar looking word. What are we really talking about here? I better check with dictionary.com. That was so confused about what Clay Higgins was saying. Economic independence or self-sufficiency, or a country, state, or society which is economically independent, which sounds like a good thing, which is what makes it so confusing, but I guess that means more along the lines of standing alone and without any interconnections that make for a what would be a prosperous country by modern standards. So what they have, they have. What they don't, and they'll never get it because they can't buy anything with their currency. Well, anyway, Derek continues, I expect the world is going to get a chaotic lesson in economic interdependency and Eastern Europe/Russian trade and supply chains in the next 72 hours. Citing here a Wall Street Journal piece that, I guess Wall Street Journal tweeting here, car parts, wheat, sunflower oil. Ukraine and Russia supply a lot of the things the world needs, in case you didn't know, and their availability is suddenly in doubt. Ukraine is not central to our supply chain, but suddenly we discovered that when this part is missing, it is. So it's not central, except it is. when it's missing anyway. Sunflower oil. Okay, that's a real thing. What else? He also has a tweet from Phil Stewart, military and intelligence correspondent at Reuters, who tweets, the Russian central bank has ordered market players to reject foreign clients' bids to sell Russian securities from 0400 Greenwich Mean Time on Monday. According to a central bank document seen by Reuters, the bank did not reply to a Reuters request for comment, but I guess that's their effort to strike back. So you can't, if you're a foreign holder of Russian securities, your assets essentially have been frozen. You can't sell off your securities and take your cash out of Russia. That's interesting. The Ukraine war is happening on two battlefields. Yes. Those defined here. Battlefield 1, made of land, sea, and air, the world. That's the fighting in Ukraine. Battlefield 2, though, is made of contracts, treaties, and policies. For example, SWIFT and central banking. And Russia's getting crushed on Battlefield 2. This in response to Connor Sen's tweet saying, what does belligerence between nuclear powers look like when the two countries can't shoot bullets at each other? And I guess it becomes economic war. Very interesting. And then another tweet from Richard Fontaine, CEO of the Center for a New American Security. Not New American Century, but Security. Did they change their name to that? Is that what it was? I wonder if that's because that's just too close. And now I have this vague memory of them saying, yeah, let's change our name. And then I was delighted because I always thought we were mispronouncing PNAC because it was Project for New American Century with a soft C and it should have been PNAS. And then they went ahead and changed their name to PNAS. Project for Center, rather. Okay, CNAS. Okay, that's a lot easier to get along with. Center for New American Security. I don't know. Maybe that's not. So maybe that has nothing to do with them. I don't know. But maybe we just had the same conversation a year or two ago and screwed it up then, too. But Richard Fontaine, regardless, had this to say, the world is disconnecting Russia from globalization's benefits. Trade, travel, finance, technology, and drawing a curtain around the country. I believe Greg mentioned this tweet. This sounds familiar. The result will be a poorer, more isolated, and weaker Russia, a bet on diminishing Russian capability rather than changing its behavior. Part of a long tweet thread that might also be interesting. Derek also collects the following from Jennifer Griffin. The U.S. Embassy in Moscow urged American citizens in Russia to think about leaving the country immediately on Sunday. Why? Yeah, certainly they were encouraged to leave Ukraine earlier to avoid getting caught up in the fighting, but leave Russia. Why? Some airlines are halting flights there, and some countries are closing their skies to Russian aircraft. Derek notes the global siege of Russia, not just financial transactions and central bank assets, but also travel. That caused a big stir over the weekend, too. As I understand, some of the Nordic countries, I guess Finland and Norway, maybe Sweden as well, or maybe some other combination of the three of them, I can't recall, closing their airspace to a Russian aircraft carrying a cabinet minister, I believe. Where he was going, I don't know, but they turned him around mid-air saying, no, our airspace is closed to you. And I don't know whether that involves, like, fighter jets telling you got to turn around or what. But I assumed that was the case because that's the way they do these things. But I later saw, and it made me realize the limitations of this thing. I later saw a tweet somewhere else. Wonder if I can find that one. But an Aeroflot flight, the Russian airline from, St. Petersburg to New York or something like that, but on its way to the United States, I believe. And shortest route, if you know about Great Circle, flight travel routes, the route takes you up over Russia and then down over Canada and into the United States. So Canada, likewise, closing its airspace to Russian flights. I don't believe the United States has done that yet. But that, too, may be one of those things where we say, all right, well, we're just keeping our foot lightly on the gas here. We don't want to floor it necessarily. But a lot of the countries along the way. And then Russia thinking, people were worried about what if they retaliate and they close their airspace. And I think I saw Armando wondering about that over the weekend and saying, well, what do we care? Where are you going over Russia? But as it turns out, again, with the Great Circle travel routes, flights from New York to Tokyo or Beijing fly up over the North Pole and then cross over northeastern, unless you're so far out there that it's actually northwestern over the international date line. But okay, whatever. The far reaches of that region of Russia. What is that? Kamchatka, if you remember from playing Risk or Diplomacy for that matter. But at any rate, yeah, you can block some of those flights. I don't know whether they've retaliated that way or not. I don't know how many flights that interrupts, but American embassy saying get out of Russia before the rest of the world tells you can't fly out of Russia because you can't cross this airspace. But anyway, this Aeroflot flight was denied the use of Canadian airspace, but was making its way toward maybe New York, maybe, I don't know where they were headed to. Anyway, because I guess they figured, what's the alternative, right? Are you going to shoot down an airliner? Is the United States or Canada going to shoot down a Russian airliner over Canadian territory to enforce this ban? And especially, it's probably packed with Americans on their way home from Russia. And the pilots have make an interesting decision there, come on, they're really not going to shoot us down. And they didn't, right? That would have been in the news. I didn't see what happened to that flight, but I'll bet they were just like, yeah, I know, we're not allowed to use Canadian airspace. Well, that's some mobster technique for a pilot, right? To say, yeah, what are you going to do about it? I'm gonna land. You might arrest me when I get there. You might take the plane, whatever. But what do I care? I just want to get out of here. Maybe he wanted to get out of there, too. He wanted to defect as well. I have no idea. But that was pretty interesting and pretty gutsy, I must say. And highlighted the weakness of of some of those sanctions. You might have to be prepared to shoot if you really think you're going to enforce that one. Let's see. There's a ruble update, is another one of Derek's tweets here from Blake Allen. Let's see. What's it say? Well, I can't identify where Blake Allen is from his Twitter profile, but the price of the ruble still collapsing, now lost over 40% of its value in the last few hours. Brief thread intermission, Derek says. What's going on here? To note that the Russian people aren't to blame for this terrible war, and many businesses, plans, families, and lives are going to be ruined by these measures and their effects. That's not an argument against policies designed to stop an immoral war. It's just reality. And a good reminder, the sudden smothering and suffocation of the Russian economy is without modern precedent, he says. This is terra incognito, and I have no idea what happens next. Hence this thread. And including a tweet from Paul Son, national security reporter for the Washington Post, who says, for those on this platform giddy about the plummet of the ruble, a word of caution. The severity of this will create forces beyond everyone's control. It could get very scary and not have the outcome you expect. Next tweet Derek collects here is from Steve Leisman, CNBC's senior economics reporter, who says, not a layman weekend? Spent the past 2 days talking to banking experts and vets from financial crises past. Their concerted opinion, which I did not share at the beginning, is that the financial sanctions on Russia are unlikely to lead to a global systemic risk issue. And then Derek pulls out this quote, the bulk of the pain will be felt in Russia in the form of more expensive imports, a much weaker ruble, and higher inflation. So that's what they say they expect. Then next, the Russian central bank more than doubled its key interest rate to 20% today, and Russia imposed capital controls. Then a screen grab that reads, U.S. and European sanctions against the Bank of Russia triggered a slump in the ruble to a record low, losing a third of its value against the dollar and offshore markets at one point. To try to avert collapse, the central bank more than doubled its key interest rate to 20% and imposed capital controls. That says pretty much the same thing, doesn't it? In 2014, Sberbank, S-B-E-R, Sberbank, was the largest bank in Russia and the third largest in Europe. Today, its London listing opened down 74%, including the tweet of a person who really appears to be named Robin Wigglesworth, who says, the Moscow Stock Exchange is shut for now, but Sberbank has a London listing and it just collapsed. Fire sale on Russian assets, Derek tweets along with the screen grab. More stuff from Robin Wigglesworth. False Agro and Mail.ru's London shares only down 62 to 63% today, and Gazprom's GDRs down 46%. Resilience, I think Robin jokes. Let's see, what else? Derek says, space to watch, Russia, Tajikistan, and China. Remittances from Russia's account for 28% of Tajikistan's economy. The collapse of Tajikistan would mean a political crisis on the border of Xinjiang province. Ringing a bell here among the production staff. That is Uyghur territory there. Let's see, including the tweet here of Bradley Jardine, research director from Oxus Society and global fellow at the Wilson Center. How will potential long-term sanctions on Russia impact economic stability and security in Central Asia? Will dependence on China increase? Brief thoughts from Tajikistan, if there are such things as brief thoughts from there. U.S. tech giants, Derek continues, under pressure from Russia and the West to respond to Ukraine. Analysts say the conflict could accelerate the fracturing of the internet. The, quote, splinter net is coming closer to reality. How interesting is that? Including a piece from Stratechery, like strategery, but strategy, or stratechery.com. Russia and the Four Internets, it's called here. Look at this title. Shifts in Social Media, Gelsinger interview follow-up. Very interesting. All from this one piece quoted here by Derek Thompson, piece from Ben Thompson. Any relation? I don't know. He's the author and founder of Stratechery. Let's see what they have to say about the splinter net. Sounds fascinating. What else? New on Monday, that's today, U.S. Treasury imposes sanctions on Russian Direct Investment Fund, its most prominent sovereign wealth fund, and its chief executive, a Putin ally. Did they name the guy? Yeah, we'll see if we can pick up on his name. U.S. has imposed sanctions on the Russian Direct Investment Fund and its chief executive, Kirill Dmitriev, an ally of President Vladimir Putin, as Washington proceeds with its efforts to cripple Russia's financial system, including a ban on transactions with its central bank. Moving on to a few more things. If you've been forced, I guess, to become an overnight expert on toilet parts and drainage systems, it's a bad sign about the state of your bathroom. Same for global finance. Interesting. That's quite an analogy. Including here the tweet from Neil Irwin, chief economic correspondent at Axios, who says, as a rule of thumb, anytime economics writers like me end up needing to learn a lot about financial system plumbing, it's a sign of something very bad happening. I have an unsettling feeling we're entering one of those times again. Each one of these tweets is connected to a different thread elsewhere that also seem to be pretty fascinating. Can't flood that bathroom with a toilet drainage problem if you never use the bathroom, says Derek. Notable that in both the bathroom and finance scenarios, this leads to some painful secondary issues, including a link to a tweet of the Spectator Index. Breaking, Moscow Stock Exchange will not open today. So, big roundup. Lots more people trying to add their own items to it. But yeah, they really made a great point here, this thread. I mean, it's so disjointed, but that's really the point, is how many pain points there really are from these financial pressures, people getting maybe booted out of their hotels, people not be able to return to the United States, even at the direction of the embassy. We might have to fly them out on military flights at some point if you can't get Russian planes over other countries' airspace. And then the question of what are countries prepared to do to enforce the integrity of their airspace, right? Are the Republicans going to say, oh, if you can't enforce your borders, you're not a country. Shoot down these Russian airliners packed full of returning Americans. It's going to create some problems. Let's see. On a smaller scale, I thought I would note this fun story, which I guess is now actually confirmed. I just saw it being tweeted around, but it's in a print outlet, but I don't know whether they really print anything. It's just a website, and two, I've never heard of it. And two, you heard it right, from the N. I don't know whether it's Then 24 or the N24 is the way the logo makes it look like. It might be the N24.com. What is that? I don't know. However, it has this story, an entertaining one, at least. A Ukrainian sailor, not in the Navy, but a sailor arrested in Mallorca for trying, but I guess maybe not succeeding. I don't know. I thought it sounded like he succeeded in the tweets. But now we're getting a fact check. Trying to sink the mega yacht of his Russian boss. Wow. Everybody's been so interested in what the fate of these mega yachts owned by oligarchs is going to be. A sailor of Ukrainian nationality has been arrested this Saturday by the Civil Guard of Calvia, that's Mallorca in Spain, for trying to sink the mega yacht of his Russian boss docked in the marina of Port Adriano in the southwest of the island. The detainee, chief operator of the ship, tried to open up a leak to sink the Lady Anastasia, 48 meters long and valued at 7 million euros, whose base port is the Mallorcan marina. The sailor had confessed before the judge in a statement published by the newspaper Last Minute, is the name of the paper, who has tried to sink the ship to take revenge on his boss, a Russian national and owner of a network of companies dedicated to the sale of weapons and military equipment to the Russian government. So some direct action there. As confirmed by sources close to the investigation, the events occurred this Saturday morning when the detainee appeared in Port Adriano angry after seeing the images of the Russian occupation in Ukraine. With the intention of taking revenge for what was happening, the sailor entered the ship's engine room to open several valves and cause a leak that would take the ship to the bottom of the port. Before leaving the ship, he notified the rest of the crew of what he had done. That was nice of him. Who notified the authorities and managed to prevent the mega yacht from sinking, which has suffered damage to the engine room. When he was arrested by the agents who came to the port, the sailor stated that he had acted out of revenge because the Russian army had destroyed residential areas similar to the one where he lived, and that the owner of the ship was engaged in the manufacture of weapons that could be used in the occupation of the country. The man was arrested by agents of the Civil Guard after the attempt to sink the boat and has spent this Sunday in court in the courts of Germany Road in Palma, if you want to get super local about it, where he has been released, accused of an alleged crime of damage after testifying before the judge. Okay, it's clearly not written first in English, but according to the statement the sailor advanced by the newspaper Last Minute, the owner of the ship is Russian businessman Alexander Mijev, M-I-J-E-E-V is how it's rendered in this version of English. Dedicated to the manufacture of military helicopters and the sale of weapons to the Russian government. The Civil Guard tries to clarify who owns the boat, since it appears to be in the name of a company. The Lady Anastasia was built in 2001, has capacity for 10 people and 5 cabins, and an approximate price of 7 million euros. It has the flag of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as it happens. What affects the... Okay, well, that's it. That was a little... extra there, but I think it's part of an ad. Hard to tell in the way this thing is put together. Okay, man. So interesting. Borrowing from the plot of The Hunt for Red October a little bit there too, and that makes it exciting as well. Gosh, there's a lot that we didn't get to today, but we are running out of time. But luckily, you have Justice Putnam coming up next with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and he'll take you on a tour of what's left. I guess, let's see, any other items from the pocket that I wanted to bring up? I guess we can save the maybe possibly interesting discussion about Shriving and Shrove Tuesday and Shrove Monday as well for tomorrow, which is Shrove Tuesday, just before Ash Wednesday. You might celebrate it instead as Mardi Gras. Very interesting, different traditions from around the world. Great time waster. If it wasn't for a major war in Europe, we could justify spending our time on that instead. But no, alas, it was not to be. Let's see. Any other things that I wanted to bring to bear? Oh, well, other than my own speculation from over the weekend about the weird psychology that might be going on. I keep seeing these pictures, you've probably seen them too, of Putin meeting with his meeting both with foreign leaders. At first, I think he did this with Emmanuel Macron, but then meeting with leaders of his own country and his own people at the end of this enormous table. And I guess this is a fairly new phenomenon we're seeing, where he sits at one end of this thing and everybody else is, 25 feet away down on the other end. There's another picture of it happening this morning with like 7 military advisors down at the other end. And I mean, they're far enough away you can't even really tell which one of them is speaking, probably, unless you recognize their voices, and maybe he does. But he's really distancing himself from them physically. And I started to speculate, and other people started to speculate, is he doing this for fear of possibly being assassinated by any of them? I do wonder whether that's a real possibility, but it doesn't really have to be a real possibility in order for it to be extraordinarily disruptive. All it takes is for somebody to make the mistake of thinking that they're the target of an assassination, or that somebody else, might be out to get them. I started off by wondering over the weekend about, how long can you survive at the top of something like this? That's not a real, even in a real government, you could be taken out, of course, but we say it's a mobocracy. But when your oligarchs, your captains, start hemorrhaging money because their assets are frozen, or the ruble drops, or they can't get their luxury goods shipped to them anymore, or their yachts are sunken or seized, or just the money's not coming in. I supply the Russian military. It should be golden times for me. But what if the government, such as it is, just stops paying, but still says, we expect delivery anyway? Well, you would say, well, if you don't pay, I can't deliver. But it's a mobocracy. Putin says, well, you deliver or I'll kill you or have you killed, right? Okay, so that begins to set people off that way. Like, okay, the Russian government can't pay me anymore. That's how I became a billionaire. At first they said, well, you're a billionaire. We made you very rich. You can afford to lose a couple of bucks here and there by supplying us during an emergency. And eventually the bills start racking up, and you start saying, yeah, well, I can't just keep floating you forever, to which Putin says, I made you. Well, yeah, but you made me rich, right? But now I'm not going to be rich anymore if I keep doing this. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll just unmake you. Not make you less rich, but just undo you. Hint, hint, right? Or just maybe it's a mistaken idea about the hint that's being dropped. That's not what's being. Maybe it's a straight up request, legit, totally on the level, and these guys start saying, I think he's hinting that he will kill me unless I'll do this. But Putin himself has got to be entertaining the possibility that they might kill him, either straight up because they oppose, getting involved in this war, not for moralistic reasons, being opposed to war, so much as it's killing us financially. That might be something that's on their mind, but all that really has to happen is that Putin has to think it's on their mind, whether it's on their mind or not, right? So then you get into these weird paranoia situation. And, right, soon Putin will be wondering about whether or not they'll kill him, and he's probably always worried about that because he knows he's at the top of a mobocracy. He's always taken that precaution to some extent. But now they'll actually have reason to do it, not just surprise him. And he might be isolating himself, he's certainly distancing himself physically at these tables. But now I'm starting to wonder whether the collapse of the Russian war effort might have something to do with this too. People ask, how come there weren't astroturfed protests in favor of the Russian invasion happening in the United States and Canada and throughout Europe? And how come there haven't been major cyber attacks against American targets or Ukrainian targets? There have been, but rest of Europe, etc. And one explanation is maybe we anticipated that and blocked it. Another answer, though, might be that the people that Putin maybe would call on ordinarily to do these things aren't answering the phone anymore, either because they're opposed to the war or because they think this is Putin calling me to come in for a meeting. And I think it's him calling me in to kill me because he thinks I'm trying to kill him. And maybe I should kill him because once he thinks I'm trying to kill him, I might as well kill him because I'm sunk. And I think maybe people who are supposed to take these assignments for making Russia's propaganda machine hum are not picking up the phone or are afraid to do it or afraid to get involved because they think it's not a request to help with the effort, but a trap and a setup to kill them. And once people start not answering the phone, the whole thing starts to fall apart. Could that be what's driving it? I don't know. Does Justice Putnam know? Let's put all the pressure on him to figure it out. Next.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
You know, hey, could be all of this, could be not all of this. I don't know. I'm not certain. And I don't know what Justice Putnam has in store for you either, because I think we've gotten to press the return button on it and send me the message about it. But come on, what else could it really be about? You know it's going to focus on Ukraine and Russia with a little sprinkling of others from around the country and around the world.